later replay. Please now welcome your session presenters, and I'll hand it to Jill Mallett to take us through introductions. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you very much. My name is Jill Mallett. I work for the Office of Civil Legal Aid, where I'm the Children's Representation Program Manager. I'm here with members of the Black Prisoners Caucus from Monroe Correctional Complex, as well as Mark Perry, who is one of their sponsors. I'm also a former sponsor of the Black Prisoners Caucus. I will briefly introduce them, and then they will take it away and introduce themselves. We have Gerald Bozeman, Eugene Youngblood, Mark Perry, Faraji Blakeney, and Mark Brown, who also goes by Martine. And we're hoping that Tony Wheat will be joining us soon. We will first, I will ask Eugene Youngblood to please tell us a little bit about himself. And as you know from the program, the topic today is the school to prison pipeline and reentry reintegration.
Okay, so my name is Eugene Youngblood, and I've been a member of the Black Prisoners Caucus since 1999 when I entered Monroe. I was arrested at 18 years old at a time where I was supposed to be in 12th grade if I had been in school. And I was just released on March the 5th, 2021, after serving a little more than 29 years. I was released on clemency from the Governor Jay Inslee, and I'm here now to talk to you about transition, what my transition has been, and what are some of the hurdles and difficulties that I face and that others might face while we go on. Thank you.
It looks like Mr. Wheat is joining us now. He's trying to get his audio connected. So now I'm going to ask Martine to please tell us a little bit about himself. Maybe we'll wait to hear from him in a minute. Gerard, can you tell us about yourself, please?
My name is Gerald Bozeman, as indicated by my title. I joined the BPC in 2014 at Monroe Correctional Complex. Also, I was fortunate to be housed with Martine and Mr. Wheat, also Eugene Youngblood. And during that time, they definitely sharpened my iron. I'm currently recently graduate of the University of Washington's main campus in Seattle, currently a law student at Southern Illinois, which is where I'm broadcasting from now. And I am also here to speak about the issues of what Youngblood addressed as far as reintegration, also the school to prison pipeline. And currently, you would think after just graduating with my BA from the University of Washington, and now currently enrolling as a 1L at SIU, I would have put that behind me and not have the barriers that are in place. However, as a convicted felon, I've had difficulties finding housing here in Carbondale. And so the issues that are paramount to me at this moment are also paramount to other individuals. And so it's a real thing. It doesn't matter the steps that you're taking. There are some systems that are just in place, and they aren't letting people who were previously incarcerated progress in their life if they decided to move in what society has deemed to be a change in the right direction.
Mr. Wheat, welcome. Are you able to turn your camera on? If not, would you be able to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background? Looks like maybe Mr. Wheat's having some technical difficulties. So I'm going to hand it over to Mark Perry.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Perry. My journey started in the late 60s, my involvement in the social and racial justice movements and counterculture That activism eventually led me to my incarceration in the California prison system. In 1979, I paroled to Los Angeles. Reintegration was challenging. In 1986, my family and I moved to Chicago, where I started working in an alternative high school. That started a 35-year journey, working with students who are at the end of the line, marginalized, and particularly students facing issues around criminal justice. That experience motivated me to go back to college. I got my BA when I was 40, went on to earn my master's and doctorate in education. And about 15 years ago, I made my first visit up to Monroe with the Black Prisoners Caucus. And for the last 8 years pre-COVID, I've been the outside facilitator for a BPC project, working with educators, where the first and fifth Friday of every month, a group of teachers mainly come out to Monroe Prison and engage with BPC members, particularly about identifying and eliminating the school to prison pipeline and being able to better serve students.
Montina, Mr. Wheat, when you guys get technology, can you feel free to just start talking, okay? And then lastly, Faraji, can you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. I'm Faraji Blakeney, BPC member, currently active co-chair of Family and Children Committee. I joined in partnership with BPC in 2015. I am knee deep into the transitioning of reintegration. I just got out of Monroe on June 23rd of this year. And I'm a father, grandfather. I've been impacted by these pipelines and these issues that plague us. And I'm here to bring that lived experience to this table and be solution-based like BPC is. We are a solution-based organization, and we want to bring a whole new dynamic to this. And even though it says Monroe BPC, we represent the BPCs of Washington State. And I started at Stafford Creek. We have a new chapter at Purdy for our sisters, and we bring their voice too. Thank you.
Youngblood, can you talk a little bit about the transition piece and some struggles you had, or some supports also, if those existed?
Okay, so the transition piece is a little difficult, but for everybody it's different. And for me, the one difficulty that I faced was that when you're released, now you have the opportunity to get a Washington State ID. And so I was provided a Washington State ID in my release packet, but when my release packet was handed to me, everything was in a sealed manila envelope, and I wasn't allowed to open it until I was on the other side of the gate. So while I'm getting released, they hand me this, and I can't open it until I get on the other side of the gate. I get on the other side of the gate, and now I'm in freedom. And so all this stuff is happening, so I didn't open it. So later that night or the next morning, I opened the release packet because I want to see what my ID looked like. I ain't never had an ID. Like I said, I went to prison at 18. I got out at 48. So I wanted to see, what an ID looked like. So I looked at my ID. The first thing I noticed is my birth date was wrong. And I thought that was no big deal. Okay, so what? It don't say January 7th, it say June 7th. No big deal. And then everybody was like, hey man, like that's a really big deal. And so fortunately enough for me, I already had employment, I already had housing and things like that. So it didn't really cause so much of an impediment to me. But what really happened was when I contacted the DOC and said, hey, you guys put my birthday wrong, they didn't want to concede that they made a typographical error. And instead, they told me, well, how do we know that the birthday we had on file for you is really your right birthday anyway? And so they went back and forth with me. They refused to change it. I ended up having to get my birth certificate, get my social security card to get it changed. And I didn't get that done for 2 months and some change. So imagine the difficulties I could have faced had I not already had employment, had I not already had a living situation. and I just didn't have no idea or nothing. Imagine what my struggles would have been. Fortunately enough, like I said, I had employment, and my employment just so happens to be helping people with their transition. I'm employed through the Freedom Project, a nonprofit organization that provides wraparound services, but actually, really, I work for the community. I just happen to be employed by the Freedom Project. And what we do is, because we believe in relationship over resource, you know, and this is something that we learned inside at the BPC, that relationship is the most important. And so now we're able to provide resource to help people, but more importantly, to provide relationship. And it was because of those relationships that I end up having a very well and very easy transition for me. And so that was the one difficulty I faced. And I think that's what you were alluding to, Jill. Thank you.
Thank you. That was what I was hoping you would talk about. Gerard, I was hoping that going back to the causes, where, because you all are members of the Black Prisoners Caucus, I want to focus on what causes, in your opinion, disenfranchisement of African American men and women in our society, and some of the issues that you all talk about in the circle. And if you could speak to that a bit.
So we've spoken about the barriers in education, but then also economic inclusion, or exclusion is another way of stating it. And more specifically, we've talked about how being previously incarcerated and not having a voice in the political system doesn't give us the opportunity to realistically give. Oh my goodness, Jill, I'm caught off guard here. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
No,
let me ask you guys a question. How
Yeah.
many of you all were in special ed when you were in school? You know, how many of you were disciplined when you were in school? And do you want to speak about how that impacted your journey through the criminal legal system? Because I know that the meeting that Mark chairs is focused on the school to prison pipeline, and that's one of the topics. So in terms of, because Gerard, I know you've talked about miseducation as part of the barriers. So can you speak about that aspect? And I think you're partly talking about the label of special education in that.
Yeah, no, definitely. You asked about disenfranchisement, and so I started to go into education, and
Okay.
I started to go back and say, okay, well, disenfranchisement, let's talk about voting rights.
Okay.
But yeah, so I think as far as it goes for the exclusion of African American students in regular classrooms, specifically special education, when we look back and we do the research and we take a deep dive and see that some of these special education programs or identification models, specifically the four Jim Crow special education classifications, are targeting Black students and removing them from the classroom. And the problem is what we've discussed. The problem is that these special education identifiers are very subjective. And so you have intellectual disabilities, you have emotional disturbance, you have other health impairments, you have learning, specific learning disabilities. And so they've targeted African Americans and removed them from the classroom. And so as a result of that, you have this differentiation where students may believe that they may be inadequate and not able to progress with the rest of their classmates or peers who are their same age. But at the same time, that creates what I would consider to be the basis, the foundation of the miseducation for education, the miseducation infrastructure. And so I'll kind of pass that on to Mark, because I think Mark was an educator for a long time, and he has a different viewpoint as being an educator, and so I'll just leave it with, I think the four special education Jim Crow classifications are negatively impacting the African American community more specific.
And Mark, do you want to speak to that, the miseducation piece and school to prison pipeline?
Right, I'll speak just briefly. I think it comes down to two fundamental issues, and I like the phrase miseducation infrastructure. And the first one is if we look at the data of who's successful and who's not successful, we can look back at least 6 decades and see that it's fundamentally, and it might just sound like verbiage, but it's fundamentally systemic anti-Black racism. And I think pedagogically and in terms of curriculum, it comes down to 2 questions. And they revolve around what we teach, how we teach, and how we assess learning. And when we look at the disparities in academic achievement, it's pretty clear that there's a huge difference, particularly between white students and Black students. If you take math in particular, there's almost a 50 percentile difference. So we have to ask the question, what's the problem here? And there's really only 2 choices. Either the problem is in what we teach, and how we assess, or the problem is with the students. Obviously, it's not with the students. And so there has to be fundamental changes within public education. And unfortunately, I'm not speaking for Seattle Public Schools, you have an infrastructure that is siloed, that is top down, and talks a good game, but we don't see much difference on the ground. There are individual teachers, there's individual schools that are doing some really good things, but as a system, it is continuing to fail systematically Black and brown students.
Does anybody else want to speak to that topic? Youngblood?
Yeah, so like for me, my personal experience, I was in the LA Unified School District. And so what happened in 1986, they start trying to integrate our schools. So originally our schools were Black kids and Mexican kids, and white kids went to school way over here. Still was the Los Angeles County, but just further out. And so they started busing us to white schools to integrate our schools. Instead of bringing them to our schools, they start sending us to their schools. And so what ended up happening is we were met with a lot of interference and a lot of standoffishness, even by the teachers. And so for me, the problem I ran into is the work was too easy for me. And because the work was too easy for me, I'll get done fast. And when I got done fast, then I would be talking and trying to engage with people because I was bored, because the work was too easy. Then I would get in trouble when I was labeled a problem in school. So then every class I went to, they said, oh, he's the problem. So I started getting suspended. Then after I started getting suspended, I started getting kicked out. And once I started getting kicked out, I just wasn't in school no more. And when I wasn't in school no more, I became a full-fledged 24-hour gang member. Previous to that, I was going to school and I still was a gang member, but I didn't have enough time to focus and really put all my energy and my efforts towards that because I still was in school all these hours throughout the day. But once I got kicked out of school, then I became a full-time gang member, and that's when my life turned for the worse, because now I'm fully committed and I'm on 24 hours a day. I don't got no other distractions, and that's where my commitment went as opposed to my academic future. And to talk about furtherance, the school to prison pipeline, when we was in Monroe, one of the things we really tried to do is start the prison to school pipeline. And Gerard is a perfect example of that, of guys coming out of prison and continuing their academics to be able to go to the University of Washington and other schools, because while we were there at Monroe, we was fortunate enough to have UBB. And now at other prisons, BPC has taken control of its own education piece. And now we have Teach, so that we can teach our own folks and send us out here with better education and better opportunities to better ourselves. And with that, I'll let that go.
Montine, can you tell me how you think your education impacted your involvement in the criminal legal system? I know I'm going off script here, but I thought you might have an opinion on this.
Well, first and foremost, I would like to say hello and most definitely acknowledge the fact that it is an honor to be among BPC members, especially from the chapter of Monroe. I apologize to you, Jill, for my delay, but to my BPC members, I think we value more relationships than time, right? So we use the best of the opportunity to take advantage from the connections that we share by bringing truth to power. And that's my position. My truth in reference to giving a voice to the voiceless, BPC members that's sitting behind the walls, languishing in that oppression, is to speak to the issues of white supremacy that's impacting, that's shattering the worth and wealth of Black communities. When we look at the public education system, we know that it's supposed to be an institution that creates social mobility from poverty or from one class to the next class. But when we see like impoverished K-12 environments that are underperforming because of lack of funding, we start to look at people instead of product. We start to look at circumstance instead of the societal construct. Within the societal construct, we know we're dealing with institutions of capitalism. When we look at education, we know this is a business. Everything is based upon numbers, performance, outcome. Taxation is based upon property that actually produce whether or not investment is given to resources that will actually create or shape the wealth of people. This is what we know. So we shouldn't be surprised when we find ourselves kind of beating around the bush when it comes to the problem, because the problem in essence is white supremacy. I think Mark hit on it best when he said the issue is not the children. The issue is with the teachers that's utilizing these policies that have been constructed by this instrument of white supremacy to actually commit acts of civil violations, right? These are crimes against children of color that are perpetuated in essence by white women, if you ask me. And I know that may be kind of controversial, but in essence, when you look at all the disciplinary referrals that we're talking about, it's sugar-coated, we find that the perpetrators of these referrals, 9 times out of 10, are white women that lack, should I say, cultural competent care in facilitating education to African-American children. But BPC members, we're collectively involved, so we align ourselves with anyone that stands as agents of change or avatars of love that's contesting some of the disservice that these institutions are doing to our children. My educational experiences, what it is, I made poor choices. I didn't take advantage of it. I blame no one for that. I own everything that I did. And as a result of that, yes, before it was called a pipeline, I found myself flushed down that waste, that construction of whatever we want to call it. I was flushed down the pipeline, ended up in the wasteland where I was afforded the opportunity to be introduced to education from individuals that had an understanding of cultural competent care. Most definitely that came from the BPC and other individuals that were educators, not teachers, but individuals that sat in the circle that knew how to extract the critical thinking skills from Black men or people of color that would basically enable us to think and actually navigate the complexities of some of the white supremacy that we're still dealing with today.
Thank you. So pivoting just a little bit, Faraji, can you talk about, because I know that you all did a lot of work when you were still inside on addressing these issues and talking about dismantling white supremacy and how to educate yourselves inside. So Faraji, can you talk about what education looked like inside DOC and the efforts that you all started engaging in or currently engaging in to dismantle white supremacy?
Yeah, education inside, what does that look like? The education that the BPC sponsors and supports is always self-initiated. Inside the education is the only mandatory thing is get your GED. And then you can sit in there for 30 years and not do nothing. That's the reason the BPC founded Teach. And because we had to educate ourselves, we weren't getting educated, we weren't being received with the mind states that we were able to bring to the table and get supported in that. So we built community around that. And we didn't know in the beginning what to coin or term to use that was being, that was oppressing us. We didn't know necessarily that it was a strategic approach of white supremacy until we got in circle and let that collective knowledge that was sitting in that room and that common story of these atrocities that happened to us young people of color in these school systems. It was more complex to our young adult or young child minds when we were being oppressed by it. We unpacked that in the circle called BPC, the Circle of Life. And we address this like I said in my introduction, solution-based. How do we solve the problems and disparities in the education system that are keeping us from maximizing our potential? And it looked like undoing racism seminars, bringing in Seattle public school teachers to sit and have these conversations that are vulnerable, that we put our vulnerability out there and expose personal stories that they're seeing reenacted still 20, 15, 30 years later. And the teachers are coming to us for the solutions. And we realize, hey, we have power, we have voice here, but our voice isn't at these tables. Our voice isn't in these policy rules. When the administration, like Mark said, the silo top down, and who gets the most hurt out of that at the bottom? It weighs upon us. And so some of the solutions to wrap this up, we created mathletes, reading groups, book studies, just to bring people in the circle and show them that we can meet you where you're at and push you to a new level. And we'll do this collectively. We felt like individuals that we address the IEPs and these other things that get labeled on these young children of color. We addressed that $4.2 million was spent on security and only $1.2 million was spent on counseling. Like, what's the numbers? Why are the police visiting these schools so much? Because do the math, 1.2 to 4.8 is where the investment's at. So I'll leave that alone.
Mr. Wheat, are you with us?
Yes, I am here.
Oh, great. Welcome. Really glad to hear your voice. Can you talk about the education inside DOC and how it's changed over the years? And maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, because the audience hasn't met you yet.
Well, my name is Antonio Weed, and I am one of the founding members of the Black Prisoners Caucus, which means that I'm kind of old since it was founded 50 years ago. I currently am no longer in prison, but I got deeply involved in education while I was at the Washington State Penitentiary. One of the reasons was, while I was going to school there to get my AA degree, I noticed that a lot of the men who were in the GED and the adult basic education, some of them were coming out of those classes worse than they went in. And so I just did a little investigation, and I found out, looking at the education in prison, something I didn't know when I was involved in it. Most educational systems are set up, this is what we want you to learn, this is how we want you to learn it, and you got this amount of time to get it. And that works if you're working with a robot. because you can program it to do what you want it to do. When you're working with human beings, you first have to find out what that person's capabilities are. Two, you have to find out what that person is interested in. And then you have to take those two and combine them in such a way that that person's going to benefit from your expertise or whatever it is you're doing. When I was teaching for a little while between my AA and my BA, I had an opportunity to sit down and just ask the guys, I say, why are you here? And they kind of look at me like, well, I have to be here. I say, no, you don't. Why are you here? You can get up and leave. But if you want to learn something, then this is what you're going to do. You're going to have to show me, one, that you want to learn, and two, what you want to learn. And then I'll find a way to get it to you. And they kind of looked at me and they say, well, suppose you don't want to learn anything. I said, tough, because you're going to learn something every day of your life. This is just an opportunity for you to choose what that is. And I took on a task that I'm happy to say it worked out well, but I was scared because if it didn't work out, I was going to lose my job. I took a poem. I read it to the guys. They looked at me like, what the heck are you talking about? And I said, okay, I want you to take this poem and take every part of it apart to tell me what it's really saying. And the poem, by the way, was Invictus. And I just said, okay, let's start out, gentlemen. Out of the night that covers me. Now, what does that mean? And I made them analyze that poem until they got to the end of it. And I told you, okay, now I want you guys to write a poem in that same manner, not just use, I'm scared of the dark. Find another way to say it in a poetic manner. And from that, I realized that education is kind of like a maze. You go in here and you work your way out the other side. Some people can't go through that maze because they don't have the analytical skills or a lot of other skills, and you have to take them where they are and find a way to get them where they need to be. And some people will never make it to the end, but show them rewards along the way, which encourages them to try to do better. The prison education system, I don't want to talk bad about it because it's terrible. It's more set up to keep people occupied in an area for security reasons. If you get an education during the process, good. If not, you didn't get in trouble, so my job was easier during the day. There are some people who come to that system and they want to do well, but it's not designed for accomplishments. It's designed for security and keeping people occupied during the day. And that was a short version, excuse me.
Thank you. There was a question from the audience. What does 1.2 investment and 1.4 investment mean? Was that, I think that was Faraji that was talking about that. We may have lost Faraji for a minute.
Well, I think I can probably bounce a little on it. That investment is the amount of money that's invested. $1.2 million against $1.4 million. And out of that 1.4, they may invest a small portion of it in education. The rest of it's in salary and benefits.
So, and hello, Elder. I haven't got to speak to you since I got, I'm sorry, y'all. But yes, what I was speaking to at one of our circles with the education committee that brings in the school teachers and some administrators, we went and got some numbers, some data, you know, and it was, this is COVID, and $4.8 million was allocated towards security and police services for these public high schools and middle schools in Seattle in the urban area. And it showed that only $1.2 million were allocated for after school services and care and counseling. So we looked at it like, why is the bulk of this money going to police our children and not into providing services and counseling and unpacking these ACEs that we've all been plagued with, these adverse childhood experiences? that we suffer through numerous of systems that flush us into this pipeline called prison. Because there's a foster care to prison pipeline also. So.
And Faraji, on that topic, just briefly, do you want to talk a little bit just about the state-raised group that you're a part of?
Yes, briefly, there's a state-raised group spearheaded by the incarcerated individuals with the CLO, Concerned Lifers Organization. And even though I didn't have life, and I was recently released to the new state law, State versus Blake, we came together in partnership with the BPC because there's a huge number of state-raised, foster care, aged out individuals landing in prison. I mean, when we met up and seen how many of us and all the different hues of people, we knew there was something systematic to this. And we've had a convene and we've talked about these things. And why is it that a big percentage of us end up in these systems of harm and end up dropped off in the wasteland of prison?
Thank you. I wanted to go back to white supremacy. And I have a question, and this is for all of you or any of you. Do you think that there's anything, or what would you say that white people can do to use their privilege in the correct way to dismantle white supremacy? Is there anything, and if so, what can they do?
Is that a question to me?
Monty, why don't you start? And it's to all of you, but you were gone, so I thought I was going to ask you first.
Well, I apologize, Gio. I'm a pacer, and maybe that's just one of the characteristics of institutionalization I've yet to dismantle in my own personal life as I'm still struggling with my reintegration. So if I am not on camera, it's because I'm pacing back and forth like that tame savage, that animal that was locked away in that cage for approximately 30 years. Me personally, I know the BPC members on the panel know my views, right? And I don't want to construe my views with the voice of the voiceless. So I would like to follow the elder in presenting points that I believe collectively the BPC agree upon. So I'll chime in along with Mr. Wheat or after Mr. Wheat, if you don't mind.
I will defer to you, Monteen. Mr. Wheat, do you have an answer to that question?
Oh yeah, I'm gonna thank Monteen for putting me on the spot. But as far as dealing with white supremacy, it's basically, and I'm trying to think of how to say what I want to say because I haven't really given that too much thought for an official presentation. If you have dirty clothes, what do? Collect them, you wash them, no longer dirty clothes. As far as white supremacy is concerned, you can also do that in the same manner, only you have to let it be known or shown that the supremacy that is taking place isn't always because someone feels superior. Sometimes it's because they feel inferior and they're attempting to overcompensate by putting someone else down. If I put someone else down, I've just elevated myself. If I keep them down, I've maintained my position. So education as far as who and what we are. We can't live on, I'm gonna call it a marble, this earth, without interacting and inner support with one another. And people who tend to isolate themselves is basically out of fear. Ignorance, and I mean ignorance by, if you're ignorant, that means you don't know. It's not to put you down in any way. All of us were ignorant to something at one time. But there's a fear that causes people to hang on to something they have, whether it's good, bad, or otherwise. And it's only going to take education, cooperation, and understanding in order to minimize some of the white supremacy that goes on. It's going to be there. no matter what, because some people will die before they change their minds. But you can bring some awareness to a person, and then hopefully they will accept what you have to say in a manner that will get them to modify, if not completely change their way of thinking.
Thank you. Do any of the others have any answers to that question that they want to weigh in on?
Can you repeat the question?
The question was, is there a correct way that white people can use their privilege to dismantle the system of white supremacy? Okay. Oh, Gerard, you got something?
Yeah, I'll come in. I think privilege is it can be utilized to uplift the people who are marginalized. I think that's a common theory that's being passed around. But as Mr. Weiss spoke about the Scheid in Florida, I think that's what's causing the rippling effect. And so I think when it comes to allyship, I think that looks and dismantling white supremacy and using privilege to uplift other people, that looks like intentional daily work. I don't think it looks like I stand in agreement with Black Lives Matter, but I'm not willing to put in the necessary work that helps to reduce the negative impacts of white supremacy institutions, right? And so I think it calls for intentional behavioral patterns that use the privilege to pass that opportunity that's given to the person who is privileged to the person who is not as privileged or coming from a marginalized, underprivileged community.
Thank you.
Gia.
Yeah.
When I think of white supremacy, especially agents or perpetrators of it, I always think of value. Like there's a value system that perpetuates the ideas of something being superior than something else. In this case, we're talking about ideas that are designed to develop resources that would liberate Black people from oppression, from suffering, whatever we want to call these atrocities. 9 times out of 10, when you're dealing with white people and they're approaching a Black circle, saying that they're going to align themselves collectively to do the work, they come with their own agenda. Their ideas are superior to the ideas in mine or on the table. Therefore, they refuse to take that second-class citizenry and allow the individuals that are primarily being impacted to actually facilitate the activity, to even delegate responsibility to them, in them being white people, that would actually allow them to use their resources, whether it's economically, whether it's politically, or whatever resource they may have that will aid and assist and dismantle whatever institutional racism that's impacting Black or brown people or communities of color for that matter. So when we speak of movements, let's take, for example, Black Lives Matter, right? There's a call collectively among Black people to dismantle the institution of racism as we know it to be socially constructed, meaning we're all humans and collectively we're coming together because we value an aspect of humanity, and that's specifically being Black lives. Well, as soon as the microphone, as soon as any instrument is handed over to these people, the agenda that they had in heart, that they believed that would benefit mainly all the people, but in the end, mainly benefits them, is the thing that takes the forefront. And quite often, and this is something historically you could analyze, especially in the event of Black Lives Matter. Historically, we, Black people, people of color, are left at the table with our hands out, still asking for that resource that obviously to us disappeared in the hands of white people. That's just a fact. When we look at the civil rights movement, that's evidence. When we look at all these movements, right? Our movement is constantly being hijacked by people aligned with whatever, anything other than Black people, right? And they benefit from it and we don't. And so if you ask, well, what could they do with their privilege to actually aid and assist communities of colors to dismantle some of the atrocities of institutional racism that's plaguing them, sometimes just fall back and play your position. Come being told what to do, to expect to do it and be held accountable for it, opposed to coming, assuming as if you have an opinion about a community or about a people that's being impacted by issues that are displaced or far removed from the community that white people live in. That's how you could use your privilege.
Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, Faraji, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate the rich catalyst that my brothers have provided me to sit back and think about this, because these questions, it's not just one direction that affects us. So when we start getting tripped up, it's because it starts triggering some of our PTSD. And like, man, it's not just one, but how do white folks show up and provide what we need and not cross that line? A lot of times it's like, oh, let me fix it. Nah, we don't need, the solution is in the circle. And you exercise your privilege by putting us in, exposing us to those circles that you have, and just sit back and listen. Sit back and learn from our lived experience, because you can't, that's part of the problem that's plaguing these unjust systems, is that people that have never had experience what it's like to be dehumanized and stripped and feel empty and purposeless, you never felt that, and you want to come with the solution. You're not a child of the incarcerated, or you're not. And so then more harm is done because the perspective isn't there. How do you exercise your privilege? You invite us in, like we have already been invited to talk in Snohomish County. Invite us in and just hold space. That's the privilege, that you can hold space. Let us in these places that we're not seen in and underrepresented in. And let us come in there and show that there is value in us. Each one of us has a unique value to offer to break and dismantle these pipelines. And we're not at the table most of the times. I'm so ingratiated that Jill reached out to me and said, hey, can you show up for this? Because she sees value in us and she exercises her privilege to value us. That's important.
Jill, may I speak?
Please, yes.
Well, in truth, I believe that everything as BPC members we need, we have. That's within us. When we look historically to communities that were Black-led, and most definitely, I'm gonna say it, I'm an agent of Black love, an avatar of Black love, a social revolutionary that focused on Black issues unapologetically. So when I speak in reference of Blackness, because I understand what's at the lowest point of the totem pole. And if you lift that up, everything on top of it will rise. That's the fact. And collectively, within my thought of thinking, I never sit back and analyze how I can align myself with anyone other than people that look like me, that are culturally competent to facilitate, to understand, to wrap around whatever services We need through relationships and convince the people to buy in that because it's of us, from us, and by us. And I'm unapologetically in saying that. And when we sit before white people and we have these conversations, it seems like it's an offense to state that truth. But the fact of the matter is, everything that we talk about daily when it comes to these social inequalities, these atrocities that leave Black bodies just slain and laid out across the United States of America, it doesn't mirror the faces that they wear. Therefore, the reality that we experience when we deal with the mental wellness issues from it is totally different from theirs. So I'm not going to invite a white psychologist, a practitioner, or a therapist into the room with Black people and ask them to advise them on what's required to actually heal from their suffering. For the simple fact, it's two different historical entities that are at play when it comes to the two separate mind frames of the people that are in the room. Yeah, I'll say it, Black wellness is totally different than white mental health, and that's a fact. And when we talk about coming into the room with solutions and things of that nature, at the forefront of our mind, we have to consider love. At the forefront of our mind, we have to consider counseling. At the forefront of our mind, we have to consider secondary, the material things that come after that, right? That's secondary, the education, all that type of stuff. That really doesn't matter if you're dealing with a people that are injured, if you're dealing with a people that are hurt, and they believe that the very faces that sit before them can't relate to them because they look like the faces that are hurting them daily. This is just a fact. This is just a communication that we have to have. Hey, look, the racial microaggression, right, Raw, I picked up on that earlier, but with BPC members, I'm behaving, right? But the truth of the matter is when we start to have conversations and we have the opportunity to speak to people, yeah, sometimes you just have to say it. Leave us alone until we want to be bothered, because we can't help to be whole with anyone else if we're fragmented within ourselves. That's
Brother
just simple
Martin.
as that.
Brother Martin, may I interrupt you for just a moment?
Yes, please. I apologize.
just need to, oh no, it's not that you were doing anything wrong. You're doing a lot of it, but it wasn't wrong. The reason I interrupted, my phone has got about 2% power left, and I just got a notice since I've been promoted to number 3 man here, I got to make a presentation to the job readiness training. I just need to know, is there anything else, Jill, you might want me to say or touch on before I have to go?
Well, Mr. Wheat, maybe you'll get 5 more minutes when you become that number 1 H in IC.
There's some things I don't want. I don't want total control.
That was a joke.
Mine wasn't. I don't want total control.
I just wanted to thank you for coming and speaking. And if there's anything else you wanted to say, please say it, but just thank you.
Well, I don't know. The brothers that I've been listening to, they've been handling it pretty well. And, you know, I'm proud of them. And I'm sorry that I wasn't here at the beginning, but sometimes you have to let the job take precedent if you want to pay the bills. And that's what I have to do right now. But I think it's been enjoyable being a part of this. And if and or when, let me know, I'll be there.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
I'm going to try. And you guys, hey, handle it.
So we're gonna leave some time for questions. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the reintegration piece before we open it up for questions. So I guess I'm going to ask any of you that want to answer this. What role would you say communities play in reintegration? And I leave that open, formerly incarcerated and not formerly incarcerated communities.
Hey, Jill. Just being that I just got out, and if it wasn't for the community that I established while in and reaching out to the nonprofits that brought services that we could self-initiate, and then my family being here, I've seen that 70% recidivism rate number, and I would be drowning. I'm overstimulated. What happened is I was desensitized for 14 years to normalcy of what life out here looks like. And now that I'm out, I heard my brother Youngblood say, I was in freedom. And I resonated with that because I'm in freedom and it's overstimulating. I have, everything needs a password. I'm being bombarded by alerts here, this here. I have so many options, more cleaners, 3 different toothpastes, and my children, and it's overstimulates us, and prison doesn't prepare you for that. It doesn't. My reintegration, if I was in prison to be rehabilitated, why is there so many hurdles that I get out to? Why isn't, if this is the goal for these systems of oppression or unjust system, whatever we want to label this, what it is, unjust, why am I not set up to succeed when I'm out by these same systems? Why isn't DOC in contact with DOL and already have all that figured out? Why isn't my trust account from DOC turned into a bank account and I leave out with a debit card? And why isn't Social Security already in contact? All these agents play a part of this funneling into pipeline, but they're supposed to be a part of the rehabilitation process too. Why I don't have access to my birth certificate? Even bigger is I get charged interest on my fines and get out with a triple amount of debt through the court system than I left with. And I don't even make enough money, 42 cents minus 25 to 35%. And I can't even get close to covering $1 of the interest. That's what I've reintegrated into. And without my community and without my family, and I'm thinking about the brothers that don't have community to get out to, and the sisters that don't have that support. That's why that number is so large, because the aftercare that the system should be providing after my rehabilitation is not there. There's no aftercare. That you cared so much to rehabilitate me, but why am I not set up for success? It makes me think about Tara Simmons and all the hurdles she had to jump to get to where she's at. And then my brother Gerard, he's saying he's in a whole nother state and still having this chain attached to his foot, so to say, for housing, for a basic need. We need our basic needs. Yes, I got 20 years for selling drugs to support my family, my basic needs. And if those aren't met, what are we gonna do? We're so overstimulated, we don't have enough time to not have a thought out plan, because everything's pulling you in so many directions. And you don't have shelter, food, and clothes. What options? That's what the importance of community and reintegration looks like, is a community that looks like us, for us, by us, that understands the depth of adverse childhood experiences, APS, adverse prison experiences. We were harmed in prison. We were harmed at school. We were harmed in our streets. We haven't even unpacked that. I've luckily unpacked that through Yoga Behind Bars, coming into the prison. And these classes are self-initiated. This isn't by DOC. This isn't mandatory. It's self-initiated. We wanted to change. My brother's going to school, law school. I'm getting ready to finish my associate's degree because I wanted to change. Another harm, I'm just a little bit maybe off the question. I'm going to tell you a harm that I just realized last night preparing for this, is that after I got my degree, if I would have still had my original release date I wasn't even able to access my new potential because my associate's degree in business, I would turn around and have to sweep bathrooms and mop around toilets for 42 cents. They don't even provide a place for me to harness this potential and maximize it so when I get out, I can utilize it.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna open it up for questions now. We have one, so feel free to type in your questions if you have them. We have 14 minutes. The first question is, oh wait, sorry. Oh, somebody answered it, but I will. What is the biggest hurdle to prison reform in our state? And what do we need to ensure a quality reentry program? What do we need to ensure quality reentry programs exist in all prisons and not just Monroe?
I can speak to that. I think,
Okay.
I'll let Youngblood go too. I think part of the problem is that we're talking about prison reform when that just, to me, like now that I'm starting to understand this issue a little bit more deeply, prison reform is kind of like saying slavery reform, right? And so I think we need to change the mindset of it being a prison reform and instead come with services that, as Faraji said, as Montine said, wraparound services, as Youngblood said, Mark Perry said, and Mr. Wheat said, wraparound services that are designed to one, deal with the issue that has occurred, but why has that issue occurred, and provide services that will stop those things from occurring in the past, I mean in the present. And so yeah, and going back off of what Faraji said for re-entry, like I'm completely overstimulated. My mind isn't working. This is day 4 of orientation for me, and so yeah, I apologize for that, but yeah, that's my point. I think if you're going to come with reform for incarceration, you're essentially saying let's reform modern day slavery. So yeah, I'll pass that to Youngblood.
Yeah, and so just to, continue to elaborate on what the brother was talking about, if we're calling something prison reform, that's like the equivalent of straightening out the chairs, the deck chairs on the Titanic as it's crashing, right? Like, why are we worried about trying to reform something that we know don't work, right? And it's never going to work, and it hasn't worked in the sense that it's not helping us. It works, in the words of Montine, it works exactly how it's supposed to work. So let me make sure I say that. I learned that from my brother. It works the same way it's supposed to work, but it don't work for us, right? It worked for other folks. And so one of the ways we can get involved is, again, I'm gonna go back to the community piece. And I ain't saying that because I work for the community. I'm letting you know because I'm a part of the community as well. And that is, we need to go on something that I've been pushing out here, which is 0 to 100. We need to go from 0 community custody to 100% community support, because we under community custody, I gotta pay $600 to be free, right? Like, what kind of sense do that make? So that they can watch me, and they're doing everything they can to make sure I go back to prison, while the community is trying to help me and support me and do everything they can to keep me out of prison. So the investment has to be back into the community and to folks who are helping and that are there to help ourselves. And again, going back to the white supremacy piece, it's not about white people as much as it's about whiteness. And so when we talk about whiteness, it's multifaceted, but one of the things that comes into play with whiteness is that white folks show up with a savior complex and that they think they can save us. They want to helicopter in and think they got all the answers, when really the answers has to come from us. And we are right, we got the answers. We need to continue to get the support and services and continue to help us help ourselves and be able to do things in our own place so that we can feel proud of that and that things will come and that folks will listen to us because they know that we've been impacted. And the last thing I want to say is I'm formerly incarcerated. I'm not currently incarcerated. And I want to give a shout out to the brothers who are still incarcerated, and they need to be here to speak on incarcerated issues because I'm not there no more and I'm not under that pressure. I ain't under that oppression. And I just want to say that I salute you and I love you. And just because I'm out here don't mean that I don't know about you in there. Thank you.
Sorry, working on my tech issues. There was another question. Hold on, I gotta go. Sorry. What legal resources have you needed or wished you had upon reentry?
Can you say that one more time, Jill?
Yes. What legal resources did you need or did you wish you had upon reentry?
The LFOs is big. The LFOs, I know while I was at one of our summits, they spoke and said that they had like a forgive all your interests or LFO day, but you had to be free. And does it really make sense to put individuals that are dealing with financial literacy and sustainability in prison and then charge them this astronomical interest rate on something that they don't even have the means to pay for? You say you're rehabilitating them, and then you send them out with this burden on their shoulders. Mr. Youngblood spoke to having to pay $600 for his freedom, like to stay out. Is that like, what is that? What's the meaning behind that? What's the intention behind that? What's the intention
Indigent
behind
servitude. Indigent servitude.
Yeah. And these things shackle us still to the system. It keeps that ball and chain, and you're subject to get wage garnishments if you don't make these monthly requirements and stuff. And this all on top of us dealing with the mental health aspect, the physical well-being, shelter, clothing, fooding. Like, do you think my LFOs with this high interest is going to come first? We need lawyers. We need a group of people that represent us civilly. We need that type of support that's dealing with that, weeding through it and letting us feel empowered to be able to combat that with the support of the legal system. So that's huge. LFOs is huge.
Yeah, and I'll jump on that too. I think so. For me, I think for legal supports, I think one thing would be legislation that actually pushes forth reintegration from a position of meeting basic needs. And so housing, as Faraji spoke, is one of those things, right? And so in Washington, we have the, don't ask, don't tell. Essentially, if you're not a registered sex offender, that's okay for you to move into housing, right? But in Illinois, where I am currently, and this needs to be national legislation. I know that this isn't really different dealing with nationally, but I think that there's other services that are quintessential basic needs that are not being met for people who are being reintegrated into society. Another issue I would say is that I think that there, as Faraji spoke about, needing to be attorneys, right? I think that there needs to be legal representation that is notifying people of the rights that they have when they're returning back into society. Because if you're unaware in a course, that doesn't give you the justification to be able to not abide by the stipulations that are put into place. And I think that when they're drafting these legislations to help the people who have been previously incarcerated and are reintegrating into society, that the people who are previously incarcerated or formerly incarcerated should be a part of that conversation, and they should be at that table, because the people who are writing these laws oftentimes haven't had these experiences. And so they're writing from a position of, well, this is what we believe you need. And so we see saviorism pop up multiple times throughout this chat, but that's the kind of the basic concept of it, right? That's it in a nutshell. You're really speaking from a position of, this is what we believe that you need, whereas you could actually take a step back, as Montine said, sit down and shut up and play your part and support. You can come from a position of, we would like to know, what do you need, and we will draft this up in a policy. And part of the problem is that we don't have the individuals with the credentials, right? And so public policy makers, right? Attorneys, right? Judges, right? All of these things are are essentially denied to people who've been formerly incarcerated to a certain extent, right? The barriers, you have to be very adroit to be able to even like get to the levels of being able to attain those credentials. And so with that type of legal support, I think that if you're formerly incarcerated and you're in school, that's my personal experience, there should be nothing stopping you from getting housing. If you're formerly incarcerated and you're looking to get a job, there should be nothing stopping you from getting employment, unless it's specifically pertaining to the crime that you were incarcerated for. And even in that case, there should be something that goes along with what we see with the ADA, right? Where disabled individuals ask for supports and those supports allow them to do the job. And if they can't do that job, then they're given another avenue for them to do a different job. And so if you're a felony or whatever your crime convicted passes is, if they say, okay, well, you can't do you can't be a banker, a teller, because you have a felony for robbery or burglary. You work in this community, you live in this community, you want to work at this bank. Well, how about we find something else that's not attached to something that's directly pertaining to the crime that you're alleged of committing. And so those are legal supports that I think that needs to be put into place. And again, I'm sorry, I'm so brain dead, but like this is, yeah, I appreciate that question. That was a really good question.
You don't seem brain dead at all, Gerard, especially since you're just starting law school. You seem on fire. And I'm going to ask one last question because we only have 3 more minutes. And this is to all of you. Can you talk about the impact of families when a brother, father, mother is incarcerated and what kind of support they need?
Cardio all the way back.
Jill, well,
Was I muted? Sorry.
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so
Can you did you hear the question?
yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So when we talk about folks who are incarcerated, I'm the child of an incarcerated parent. And obviously my children are the children of an incarcerated parent. And so I understand the dynamics of what you're asking, what it went through. And so your folks, they need the love and support from you, from the community and everybody else. And what we have to do is we have to find some way to kind of interrupt that and be able to continue on, because my mom did 21 years in prison from the time I was born to the time I was 21. When she got out, I was already 3 years into serving my sentence. And so my daughter was 1 when I was born. She's 31 years old today. And so fortunately enough, she's been well adjusted. But the things that we need while we're incarcerated, whether it's your family member, and also not just your family member, your friends. We got friends who are still there who are like our family, and they need love and they need support as much as anything else. They need relationship. They need to be in relationship with people. They need people that they can count on. And for anybody in prison, that's really what we need more than anything else. We just need people we can count on. So if you want to be there for somebody that's in prison, just be a person that you can count on.
Well, thank you. It's 1:59 and we're out of time. I just want to thank all of you so much. And thank you for letting me moderate this panel. I really feel honored to be able to do that. So thank you. And thank you for everybody for watching.